Muszę rozumiem, transmisję na żywo, to rozumiem. Mam dotknąć? Nie? No to trzeba. O, teraz rozumiem.
Tak, nie potrzeba kliknąć. Natomiast chyba przez pana profesora Hardwela.
Dobrze.
This meeting is being recorded.
I znowu skoczyło. Spotkanie jest, przepraszam bardzo. Rozumiem. Czyli co naciskamy? Rozumiem. Dobra. Okay.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. We are starting our webinars. Thank you to everyone who is following us. Today we have really outstanding panel. We have a special guest to our webinar, Юлія Свириденко, the Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine. And we have a really prominent panel with recognized economists Lєшек Bальцерович, Іван Міклош, Андерс Ослунд, Крістофер Хартвел, Марек Домбровski. And I'm really excited with this discussion that we are going to have. We'll be discussing Ukraine and Ukrainian reforms. The reason we have gathered here is op-ed of the Vice Prime Minister Юлія Свириденко, what economy we are building. This piece really attracted a lot of attention, and not only in Ukraine but also abroad. This view is really very different what we used to hear from Ukrainian officials for quite a long time. It proposes very pro-market position, but there is a really strong question how the declared goals might be addressed amid current circumstances. We will try to discuss all these points today. But before we start, few technical issues. Our format today, actually we planned 60 minutes, but I was informed that Vice Prime Minister will be with us only 45 minutes, and I hope we will be able to discuss everything we have for such a short time. We have broadcasting of this meeting via YouTube, Facebook, and other channels. People who are following us, they will be able to ask questions. Actually, this time we will not be voicing all questions we receive. Probably I'll select one or two if we'll have enough time. And also for those who need translation, unfortunately, YouTube doesn't provide such service, so you will need to log in via Zoom and switch to Spanish channel. And unfortunately, no Ukrainian channel so far. So you select Spanish channel and you will hear Ukrainian translation. So now I pass the mic to our special guest, Юлія Свириденко. And please, Yulia, the floor is yours. We are excited to hear from your position.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Actually, it's a big honor for me to participate in such panel and to have this discussion. It's a very important discussion for us, and we discuss, very essential question for all Ukrainians: what kind of economy we are building. So, that it's actually underlying question for all Ukrainians who believes that we can build better and more prosperous country at the post-war period. And our main objectives actually is to make this, as we call, triple jump from the developing economy to the, let's say, from frontier economy to developing economy. If we speak about frontier economy, we mean that our GDP is under $4,000 US, and if we make this triple jump, we will be able to achieve $12,000 US per capita. And in practice, it means that we shall create so-called Ukrainian economy miracle, probably. So with annual GDP growth around 7% over a long period of time. So, and we absolutely believe that only economic growth can stimulate and can fulfill our social mission as a government to create equal opportunities for Ukrainians, to provide modern education, to provide affordable health care, to provide absolute secure. And we absolutely believe that entrepreneurship can be driven for economic growth, and hence the primary the primary source of economic growth is economic freedom. And economic freedom starts when the government ends. That's for sure. So, and the existence of Soviet Union time proved that business and government are on the opposite side of the economic axis. And in contrast, the smaller the government and the bigger the private business in the economy. So that's why we work out 10 steps how we would like to achieve the economic goals for Ukraine during the next period. And the first one is optimal size for the government. We redistribute through the budgets of all levels around 40% of GDP. That level can be compared to the developed economy that grow under 3% of GDP per year. So that's why it means that the more we take out from the business, the less they invest to economy. So we understand that we should reduce the percentage of GDP that goes through budgets of all levels, and we should reduce this fiscal percentage of GDP from 30% to 35% in the next year, and then we should move to 20% in the next 10 years. Second thing is, of course, increase a small and medium-sized business. So we need to remodel the structure of Ukrainian economy, where the main contribution of GDP should be made by small and medium enterprises. So I think Poland and Czech Republic and United Kingdom and the United States are showing a great example of how it can be achieved. We need millions of Ukrainians to be involved in entrepreneurial activity. We even call it, and it should be called like a new national idea for Ukraine. And we as a government even launched during this war unprecedented granting programs for small and medium enterprises to stimulate them to create and expand. And it's a very, let's say it's a big demand from Ukrainian side to participate in such program. And the third thing is, of course, decrease the regulation. We must stop pretending to control every aspect in life of our country. So it's meaningless and doesn't provide any well-being for people. It can be a resource for corruption, and we understand it. So we suggest the philosophy, so-called like a free step, where entrepreneur can do whatever he or she wants until it's violates freedom of other people and expose the society to danger. We as a government started this massive deregulation even during the war. We have converted more than 500 permitting procedure into declarative principle. And during today's cabinet ministry meeting, we also, like a Minister of Economy, submitted the draft law, so-called regulatory guillotine, to cut license by December. So now is the next step. We will go to Верховна Рада. We'll see how they will vote for such law, a very essential law for our business. Fourth is establish the rule of law. We understand that FDIs will flow as a result of law enforcement, not vice versa. So the lower the country risk, the lower required rate of return, the higher number of potential investment can come to Ukraine. The fifth is an export-led growth strategy. So we understand that Ukraine achieved the highest number for GDP last year to $100 billion in 2021, and due to our expensive foreign trade. Of course, war significantly pushed us back from the upward trend, and now we should get back on a growth trend by development industrial processing. So now, if you look at the numbers, we export like 75% of raw material and 25% of finished good, and we shall change this trend and change it vice versa. So we shall export to 25% of raw material and 75% of finished goods. It actually become an essential problem for us due to the blocking of seaports, when we understand that we physically need to decrease the volume of export goods, but not to lose the export revenue. So one way is just to develop an industrial processing, nothing else. And 6 is intensive capital investment in production facility. Ukraine is always underinvested for decades. So, and we estimate for ourselves that we shall reach at least 35% capex of GDP annually during the next 5 years. So now we invite business to develop these ideas that we, like a Minister of Economy, developed in our investment menu, and we made this presentation of this investment menu during the Lugano conference. It's a menu comprising over 600 projects for $400 billion. So, and now we invite business to develop these ideas in investment memos for the jointly approach of foreign equity investors. 7th is a transport, we must create extra logistic capacity, and it's a key and main for industrial economy. 8th is a massive privatization. We shall further decrease the role of government by exits from SOE through privatization. So transition of state enterprises into private ownership is actually another impetus to economic growth of Ukraine. And we already started 2 days ago privatization from small and medium enterprises. As you know, we make amendments for the privatization law, so to be able to speed up this procedure and to get another sources for covering our budget deficit. 9th is the development of social service sector through PPP. So public partnership is an amazing opportunity for social sector. Mostly it lacks efficiency, it lacks finance as it led by the government, and private capital will decrease costs, will increase the level of service and stimulate growth. Considering the scale of social sector and considering infrastructure demolition due to the war, I believe that it's only one reason how we can rebuild the social infrastructure in our country. And 10th, and the last one, I'm trying to speed up my speech, it's a military tech breakthrough. We will further make the development of ecosystem for military tech startups, so to emerge, and it's very promising area for Ukraine, as we understand that secure question will be number one for Ukraine and will go through all sectors. That's why military tech is also essential thing for us. So to conclude, so despite the great grief of the war, I see Ukraine as a modern, resilient, entrepreneurial economy that is preparing, to make, as I told you, to make its triple jump from a frontier economy to development economy in 10 years. Thank you. I'm trying as brief as possible.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate this. I think, Leszek, we would be happy to hear your feedback and maybe questions.
Immediately. Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't have many substantial comments because I think first one should put an emphasis upon methodology. And I think there are two main problems. The economy during the war, which I hope Ukraine will win, and will stop. But we should think, what about the economy during the war? And first, in every war economy, there are some centralistic arrangements. This is the war economy. And one should think, how is it in Ukraine, first? And second, what reforms are feasible under the war conditions? It's not enough to say we deregulate. One needs a concrete program, and also one should investigate what were the sources of regulation so far and how to abolish the sources of regulation, because there are political interests. So remember, there are no economic reform without political reforms, and one should dig deeper. The same goes, of course, for privatization. I wish it will be possible, but one needs an elaborated program. So the first stage is the war. And what to do to win the war, at the same time to do the reforms, and what not to do, what is not required by the war. Because there might be temptation to justify some centralistic arrangements which are not necessary for the war. So one should analyze this. This is the first. The second, after the war, which hopefully will be won by Ukraine. And let me say some obvious things. First, diagnosis. To be blunt, after independence, Ukraine was not converging very much. Very, very slow growth. Why? We should start with diagnosis, and there is a lot of it, so I'm not saying we have to discover America, but we should proceed at two levels. First, the first level, employment, investment, productivity. But beyond these factors, there are deeper factors, which we call systematic, institutional, and there's a lot of it. So we have to summarize. There is no need for me to repeat, but one can put it bluntly, so far, economically speaking, Ukraine was a failure. And it needs to catch up, drawing conclusions why Ukraine was a failure. Once we do that, then one should think what would be the starting point for radical liberal reforms after the war. So one should sketch a potential situation after the war, because starting points matter. I repeat, I am very pleased that, as I can hear, there are some intentions to launch market reforms during the war. And let us hope it will happen. But we have to point out what would be the potential situation once the war ends. And one more, in looking at diagnosis of the unsatisfactory economic performance of Ukraine under independence, under the war, one should try to look, are there any countries in the world which were facing similar situation and have been successful with reforms? What can Ukraine learn from the other? I don't know whether there are such examples, but should one look, at least. In general terms, of course, it is pretty easy to say what should be done. And Minister has mentioned massive liberalization, massive privatization, fiscal discipline, etc. But as with other radical reforms, whether they succeed or not, it will be the balance of political forces in Ukraine. By political forces, I do not only mean political parties, I also mean businesses, larger businesses which are politically connected and were drawing benefits from this. So it's not enough, even though it is very important, to sketch the main directions of reforms which would speed speed up in a lasting way the Ukrainian economic growth. But then one can look at the balance of political forces. So, and if necessary, one should think about how to change it so that the reforms, which was to some extent slowed down or not succeeded, could succeed in Ukraine. And ending my introduction, I would say, Ukrainians have displayed unbelievable patriotism in defense of their nations. You need this patriotism to launch reforms. Those people who support the defense of Ukraine against Putin's aggression should understand, and this is a question of communication, our patriotism is now to change the balance of forces so that Ukraine grows economically stronger, and thanks to that, Ukraine will be stronger, also militarily. Thank you.
Thank you, Leszek. Ivan, you spent a lot of many years in Ukraine in many projects. I would be happy to hear your opinion, your position, please.
Yeah, thank you, Dmitry. First, I very agree with Leszek that it's necessary to recognize the wartime and after wartime. Just to add to this, that it is very important how this war will end, which means to end in such a way that it will not create new instability and problems, because reforms, as Leszek also said, are impossible economic reforms without political reforms. Very important point here is that candidate status to European Union is very, very important. And it should be on one side, because what we will have the problem. During war, it is natural that it has to be some kind of centralization of the power and using this power for the victory, success in war. But after war will be hopefully finished, it will be necessary to reduce this concentration of power, of course, because one of the preconditions of the EU integration are political criteria and democracy. And EU integration will be, success in EU integration will be unavoidable part or precondition for the successful economic reform as well. I think we have good examples of especially Bulgaria and Romania, who at the beginning of 90s, they had really chaos and this spontaneous transition with hyperinflation, but then anchor of the EU integration played a very important role in the pushing of the necessary reforms. It could play also in Ukraine, but I see danger here in this area, because if power is concentrated in the hands of leaders, few leaders during war, then it should be not such easy to deconcentrate or to return to the normal democratic process. This is one point. And even I have to say that, as you said, Mitro, I spent 5 years in Ukraine, and I have seen that at the beginning of Zelensky election term, it was a real reform storm, let's say, during Honcharuk's government. But then these reformers have been removed, and they have been replaced by not all of them. I think Yulia is surely an exception from this, but a lot of loyal administrators, let's say like that. And to manage any country by this kind of ручное управление, how in Ukraine and in Russian it is calling, it is really difficult. And even big country with big troubles, where you need a lot of reforms, is simply impossible to manage in this regard. Which means I see there one of the risks for the future. And on the list of these 10 points, what was mentioned by Yulia, I think they are correct, of course, and we all agree that a liberal approach will be very important with deregulation, with privatization, with macroeconomic stabilization, with the increase of capital investment. Surely, this is necessary approach. But problem, of course, and the key problem again and again will be confidence of investors, confidence of partners. And rule of law in this regard is the key. Simply, it will be the key. And let me just mention one thing, which is capital investment. as Julia also correctly mentioned, it will be necessary really significantly increase fixed capital investment. But let me say a few figures. In from 2016 to 2020, overall fixed capital investment was 15.9%, let's say 16% of GDP. If it is necessary, as Julia has mentioned, to have 30 or 35%, and I agree, because there is no country in the world, except the oil countries, which had high and sustainable economic growth. Every of these countries had a fixed capital investment as share of GDP higher than 25%, which means I agree that if we will have 35%, it is great. But what does it mean? For achieving 35%, it will be necessary to have 20% more. And if we take GDP from 2020, it means $26 billion yearly. Every year, we will need $26 billion more if we take GDP, of course, from 2020. And this is simply impossible to cover from domestic sources, either public sources or commercial domestic sources, which means dependency of foreign direct investment will be crucial. Of course, for this, confidence, rule of law, private property protection is the key. We know and we see that also reform in this area is going on. There is progress, surely, but this progress is not strong enough, which means this is also a reason why it will be necessary to have really much bigger progress in this area. And of course, one thing is to have a really new judiciary system, which is impossible to achieve in a few years. But if there is real intention, if there is real interest, if there are real first steps, then confidence is possible built not also by doing these first steps. I think it will be very important, and in connection with this, it will be important how money from this recovery fund will be used, because there will be a lot of money, surely, from the official sources, from the private sources, from the international financial institutions, which is possibility, which is chance, but also it should be threat if it will be not used, if this money will be not used transparently and effectively, because then it will only confirm this kind of general image and simplified image that this is no chance, this corruption and so on, so on. Which means I see as the key confidence of the also inside of the country, but also outside of the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. Anders, please share your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for organizing this. And I would like to congratulate the Deputy Prime Minister Sviridenko on this excellent article. I read it in Ukrainska Pravda with great happy surprise that it expressed the principles I think that by and large we all here share. And a few things that I liked about it. First of all, as you expressed now very well, Deputy Prime Minister, that you have clear liberal principles, that there is a clear focus. I like this, the 3 steps to say. You need macroeconomic stability with a small state. You need property rights, and you need full economic freedom. On the economic freedom, actually, to Leszek, it seems that there has been more freedom now during the war because the state can't control as much as usual and has given up much of the inspections. So we are now seeing very many new enterprise registrations because it's easier, which is a bit counterintuitive. With regard to the portions, 7% a year economic growth for a decade, that's just right. This is what Ireland had in the 1990s, the Baltic states, Poland, Slovakia time, and Romania recently. So this is what you should head to. And I think that you are basically right with the proportions. You want to have, during that period, 30 to 35% of GDP in investment. And this should be private investment. It is to a great extent. And then you must have conditions so that people want to invest. And with regard to the public expenditures, countries that I think are in good shape now, Slovakia, Romania, Lithuania, in the neighborhood, they have about 35% of GDP in public expenditures. So to go below 30%, I think is excessive. And what Leszek talked about, I mean, the real threat in Ukraine is the populism, that there are politicians who promise to cut all taxes, but we are not discussing what public expenditures to cut, and then they want to subsidize on an arbitrary basis, and they say that the state should solve everything. These are, so to say, the things that one needs to fight against. And I like to think about the period after the war, as you do in this article. So I'm not much on discussing how things should be done during the war, hoping that Ukraine will soon win the war and kick out the Russians from Ukrainian territory. But what I would like to see is a trinity, what Ivan discussed, reconstruction, reform, and EU accession together. I would like to see a very strong EU role in this, and preferably done outside of a commission so that it can be speeded up. It's not these annual reports of what steps forward that have been taken. So EU accession I see as an anchor in the whole thing. What I also think is very important is to confiscate the $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves that are being held in the West, because this money should be used as war reparations for Ukraine. And the best way of getting the money should be as insurance. And this, since the money is being procured outside of Ukraine, it needs to be foreign management, or dominantly foreign management of the money, because otherwise the money will not come to Ukraine. Because any Western government that confiscates Russian state money will have to prove very well how the money has been used, and that everything has been done properly. And that means that they need to have sufficient transparency, sufficient audit, and sufficient control. Otherwise, they won't do it. So the idea some people have that the money should be delivered to Ukraine is not realistic, or to the Ukrainian government centrally, it's not realistic. Deal with it as insurance, first for what has been destroyed, which is on its own more than $100 billion. Then one warning: no private money will come early on for investment. I'm a bit worried when some people in the Ukrainian government want to go on an investment tour. Don't attract money, private money, for years after a war. Foreign investors are cowardly. So first you need to convince them. Then finally, judicial reform is the central thing, and it has to be done from the top. There are 3 countries that have done it right in the post-communist world. East Germany, that did, where the West Germans did the job. Estonia, that had good judicial reformers early on. And then Georgia, under President Saakashvili, all did it from the top down. So if you don't have a Supreme Court and a Constitutional Court that are clearly standing up for good norms, nobody will trust the rest of the judicial system, and then you can't have property rights. So Ukraine is perfectly normal in this regard in not having property rights. That's what essentially all the post-Soviet states have today, with some exception for Georgia. And it requires serious work from the top. I think that's the one most important thing, while of course macroeconomic stability and economic freedom are also very important. Thank you very much, and I greatly appreciated your article.
Thank you, Anders. Christopher, please share your thoughts, and I hope we will have a chance to listen to reaction from Yulia for those comments and questions.
Great, thanks, Dima, and I'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister, echoing what Anders said, for her work and for her article. It's refreshing to see this kind of liberal, forward-looking thoughts that are coming out from the government of Ukraine, especially thinking beyond kind of the current tragedy. I have only a few points. First one is, it's kind of a cautionary tale. I would say one of the things that we need to worry about going forward is not necessarily macroeconomic outcomes. It's not necessarily a worry about macroeconomic quotas or numbers or things that we need to hit going forward, because we need to worry about the microeconomic, the structural, the institutional reforms, as Leszek mentioned. Now we know that kind of macro is a distillation of micro. It's an ecology of plans, as Richard Wagner says. So for that, I think there are three in particular areas that we need to look at, one of which has been mentioned already, kind of getting the state out of the economy. You said it brilliantly, Deputy Prime Minister, about not having the state involved in every bit of the economy. I think that is crucial. Along with that goes decentralization and the continuation of decentralization, and how we can kind of further those reforms in a post-war Ukraine. The second wasn't mentioned, at least I didn't hear it, is about competition. And I don't mean necessarily a centralized state competition committee or antitrust or something like that, but about allowing for the conditions for entrepreneurs to be drawn into the economy to erode the power of state-owned enterprises, so that privatization, when it does occur, doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter the assets that are being sent. You're not protecting these large-scale kind of industrial combines. It's so that people can compete and they will win. And Leszek will tell you that this is one of the hallmarks of kind of the Polish story, and I think one of the successes of Poland. The third point, which I didn't hear at all, and goes on with what Anders was just saying about property rights, is land. It took 20 years for the land sale moratorium, the temporary land sale moratorium, to be repealed under Zelensky's government. And I think this is a great credit to his. In conjunction with the judiciary and judicial reforms, which is necessary for the enforcement of any property rights, where do you see, and where does the government see, the development of property rights as it pertains to land going forward? Will there be more movement on creating a land market? Because this is the only way that you're going to have everything else, that you're going to have entrepreneurs who are able to collateralize their land, rebuilding the financial sector, being able to move ahead with the realization of their dreams. So that's my question for the Deputy Prime Minister. And I would like to thank Dima for setting this up and having me placed amongst these luminaries. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Marek, you've been observing Ukrainian reforms, I guess, from the beginning. Your concluding remarks and questions.
I'm sure that you will be concluding. I don't pretend to such a role, but I would like just to mention two things. One is, I think we should be maximally pragmatic. So, however, goals of post-war reconstruction looks interesting, attractive, I am afraid that now much more challenging task is to think how the economy should be managed during the war, which will continue for, at least for a while, if not no longer. And this has at least two aspects, two dimensions. One is macroeconomic, how avoid fiscal and balance of payment crisis in the coming months, because it would be a real disaster for the country, for the social cohesion, for the defense capacities, etc. Of course, this must involve more international assistance, but also I think that it must involve quite clever domestic management. Second dimension is what Leszek mentioned, micro, I would say, economic, institutional, is how much the economy during the war should be managed in centralized command manner. Of course, we know many historical examples. The economy was exactly managed during the war in this way, but every war, every situation is different. And I am afraid that first, Ukraine doesn't have strong enough government capacity to manage continuous economy in a rational way, in centralized manner. So I think that some selection is necessary, that some processes, some variables should be managed in centralized way, but some others I think could be really liberalized even during the wartime and give more freedom. And also it's very important to avoid situations that during the war, the previous reforms, however we may be critical of them, but still they were quite substantial, especially since 2014, would not be reversed on the name of war management. And this is one my comment. Second concerns European integration. It was, I think, great diplomatic success of Ukraine to get candidate status in June. I was privately surprised that European Council took this decision even a few days before. It looked that it will not be easy. It happened, is very good. But the way from here to further steps, it will not be easy. We know from experience of several Balkan countries, Western Balkan countries, that one thing is get candidate status and second start real negotiation. North Macedonia is waiting already 17 years. I am not wrong for starting negotiations since obtaining candidate status. And I am afraid that maybe enough in the incumbent EU member states, Euro enlargement skeptics, not to push this process forward. So it is in the interest of Ukraine to move forward. I look at this European Commission opinion, which was then approved by European Council, and this is sort of list of conditionality to start negotiation. And not surprising for me, and so I think anybody in this group, is that practically most of these conditions have institutional character, or not necessarily economics. The reform of judicial branch of government, reform of public administration, fighting corruption, and several other things which are on agenda of Ukraine from several years. And I think without solving these problems, also economy will not be properly reformed. So this is my second remark. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marek. I see that we have exhausted our time. It's already 45 minutes, and I would be happy if Yulia will find 1 or 2 minutes for reaction or comment or responses. That will be really golden.
Well, thank you for your feedback. And I think that actually we also understand perfectly well that we look at the economy and we look at 2 stages. Stages that now last, it's a war stage and post-war recovery. So I understand that we like a government have now a big challenge how to make economy run right now, today. And a big challenge for us is to find tools for Ukrainian people to be fully engaged in the labor market. It's meant to return our people back from abroad. And the second thing is to involve them in entrepreneurship by launching, as I told you, our governmental programs for granting in general. So we understand perfectly well that there are different challenges during the war period, and another challenges is that will occur at post-war period. So what we'd like to raise in this article and in my speech, it's that we have our own view. We understand how we should move further. And of course, all these reforms should be feasible, and we should stand on the ground. And all these key steps that I mentioned, it's not just like a slogan or something like this. It's exact policies that should be worked out and should be implemented by different ministries, by cabinet minister in general. I absolutely agree that the previous reforms should be prolonged, and public administration, fighting with corruption, and I think that, and we mentioned it for ourselves, judicial reform, property rights related to judicial reform, it's very important. So actually, I think that all the feedbacks are actually in line with our thoughts, with our minds, and we understand that it's a big challenge for us. And actually, Ukraine now divided have two fronts: military front and economic front, and that's why we're extending and we're fighting on our economic front, and which should involve all people that are ready to work for Ukraine and to fight for Ukraine, to speed up our win. So that's why I'm very grateful for this discussion. I make notes for myself, and I think there is no, as I told you, all sorts are in line with our ideas, and probably we'll also, after even this meeting, we'll add some points that should be on the table of our cabinet ministry, and should be even now implemented, not waiting until we win. As I absolutely agree that there are some essential reforms that need to be prolonged, and I think that we will try to make it even during this period of time. But we are, as I told you, for economic freedom, and we will try to liberalize everything that can be liberalized during this period. I absolutely agree that sometimes during some wars, the economy sometimes centralized, and we agree that some sectors should be centralized, but in general, we are for economic freedom and for development of entrepreneurship. And all the measures that I mentioned, it's not just words and exact programs that we're trying to launch, and that we're trying to show. I think that, Ukrainian people show extraordinary resilience, and now, economic front also should show this extraordinary resilience, and I think should create this economic miracle. I have too many thoughts and too many notes, sorry.
Actually, we are really sorry that that we exhausted our time so fast. It would be very good to have some extra session for discussion, but unfortunately, actually, your colleagues said that the president is waiting, and probably we should not make the president wait. I see that all comments and actually are actually to Yulia, and as I said, we do not have time to keep Vice Prime Minister. I think we should wrap up in this very fast manner. This discussion, I think all proposals and comments and questions are really very really valuable and really strong. I hope that they will be considered and in some way reflected in further actions. Thank you very much. I have a feeling that we have not ended this, but I think I see that the time have exhausted, and we need to stop here. Thank you, Leszek, Ivan, Anders, Marek, Chris. Thank you, Yulia, for your time that you you were available for this talk and you were ready to listen to all those comments and proposals.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And
Thank
goodbye.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.